we will be able to come back to it later. So we also wanted to just give you a quick update. Many of you may have come from our last one, but what is a conservation district? We're a non-regulatory agency, a special district for the state. We represent Snohomish County and Camino Island. There's 44 other conservation districts across Washington, and they're nationally too. We were born out of the Dust Bowl. So we are here to protect natural resources, and we do that through multiple ways, working with agriculture, cooperators, also people that live in the city. So today we're focusing on our urban audience, and we do a lot of webinars this way. Also, upcoming events. So for Mountlake Terrace, we did a session in March on alternatives to lawn. You can always go back to our YouTube channel, our website, or the City of Mountlake Terrace website to find that video. And then this fall, we'll be doing our Orca Recovery Day event. We've been doing that about 4 years around Puget Sound. And the whole idea is to protect the habitat and the waterways for our orca. So we'll be doing some planting and education events, so stay tuned for that in October. With us today, we have Laura Reed, and she's the Stormwater Program Manager for City of Mountlake Terrace. Laura, if you just want to say a few welcoming words.
Yes, thank you, Kari. I just wanted to say that outside of work, my main passion is organic gardening, and in work, it's preventing pollutants from reaching surface water. So it's nice to have this webinar, which kind of brings both of those things together and allows everybody to enjoy the expertise of the Snohomish Conservation District. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura, so much. And then also, of course, David Jackson. So he's going to be our main presenter today. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to you, David.
All right, thanks very much, Kari, and thanks everyone for joining us here today. So just start by saying welcome. Thanks for joining us. As we said before, we're part of Snohomish Conservation District. The community conservation team covers a lot of different things, including green stormwater infrastructure, urban agriculture, residential habitat, and fire-safe communities. We're going to primarily be talking about stormwater infrastructure today, but we're going to be talking about it through the natural yard care lens. A little bit of background about me, because it always helps to know who you're listening to. I started life as well, I didn't start life, but I started my career as a business administrator. I went to University of Washington, Bothell, where I quickly transitioned to environmental science, which is so much more fun than business in my own opinion. And then from there, I made my way to the Snohomish Conservation District. So we are going to talk about kind of 5 major steps in natural yard care. The first one being healthy soil, the second one being planting well or planting right, the third being smart watering, the fourth being avoiding the use of pesticides and other inputs, and the 5 being natural lawn care. So we'll of course start at the start with healthy soil. Soil 101, what most people probably know as soil or dirt, we really refer to as topsoil. It is the highly organic top layer in which plants do the majority of their growing. It's made up primarily of organic deposits, partially decomposed so that organic material is what we refer to as bioavailable. And plants can use those nutrients to grow. That's why a lot of the plant roots are very soil. The next layer down is a mix of organic and mineral soils. Plants need minerals as well. And plant roots also extend into this, though some of them are not as deep as this. This is sort of what we refer to as the A horizon. And then from there we get to B, C, and R. You don't really need to worry about those after we get down to subsoil, except it does matter for what kind of plants you may be planting, because that may be a type of restrictive layer. There are 3 kind of major types of soil and subsoil. The 3 major types are sand, silt, and clay. It's important to kind of know what you have and what mixture you have, because that determines how quickly water drains through your soil, which may determine what kind of plants you can put there. So as I mentioned, water and nutrients are all kind of mixed together in the A and the O horizon, in the first kind of top layers of the soil. The big 3 that are water soluble and therefore flush into plants through water are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or NPK. Other ones, calcium, manganese, and then other trace elements are also really important. But it is important to know how much you are watering your plants, what kind of soil, what kind of minerals are available in the soil, because that will determine what sort of plants you have and how healthy your soil is, meaning how nutrient rich it is. So, of course, the next question is how you build healthy soil. We know what makes soil healthy is it's nutritious. It has, an appropriate amount of drainage. It has lots of life going on, a lot of bioactivity with soil biota and little critters and worms and stuff crawling around it. But how do you build that? If you have, just some of the crappy glacial till that we all suffer from or enjoy, it does drain very well. Here in the Pacific Northwest, how do you work around that? Well, the fastest way, and the way that a lot of places will tell you, is to mulch. Get some native wood chip mulch, put it down over the top of your soil, and it will slowly decompose and will add nutrients to your soil. Another one is planting. If you plant plants with particularly deep tap roots, they will work their way down into the rockier, more mineral-rich areas, and they will transport those nutrients up. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then this is the easiest one: don't rake. A lot of people, we want to get out there and rake away those leaves, and I understand. I actually enjoy raking myself. You get the big piles, you get to jump in, though I strongly suggest not. But an easy way to actually nutrify your soil is to either take leaves that you have raked up off of your lawn, for instance, and put them in an area that does not have a strong soil. I have a friend who went around and asked other people if she could rake up their leaves and then put them in big contractor bags and haul them back over to her yard and dump them on her yard. So the neighbors were like, "Yeah, I don't want to rake the leaves," and she said, "Great." And she raked up all of their leaves, and she took those nutrients right home for herself. But if you are in the middle of summer, as we're just getting ready to kind of start doing some yard work, and you go, "Gosh, how can I nutrify my soil quick?" Mulch is a great answer. So a lot of times I say, well, you can plant for good soil, and people look at me and go, "What are you talking about? It goes the other way. You get good soil and you put in plants." It doesn't have to. This is something that farmers have been doing for a while. They refer to this as nutrient farming. It's commonly called cover crops or overwinter crops. But the idea is that you plant these plants that have very deep tap roots, and these are all prairie plants. Not all of them are native, but these are all prairie plants, and they all have very deep tap roots, as you can see. And as those tap roots get deeper and deeper and deeper, the root hairs, the root systems, access those deeply mineral-rich soils, and they start to pull in minerals from those deep mineral-rich soils, and they transport them up the root to new growth occurring above ground. And then, of course, they grow and they flower and they get beautiful, and then they die back. Winter comes and all of the greenery dies off, and that lands on the top layer and begins to decompose and builds that top organic layer. So you kind of see what's going on here is you have certain nutrients, especially mineral nutrients, that are way down deep, and you're basically putting in a pump where the plants are pumping those nutrients up to the green growth that then gets deposited as organic nutrients. And there are a lot of plants that learn to grow in exactly this kind of soil here in the Northwest. We'll talk about native landscaping a little bit later. But if you are thinking, "I don't know if I want to mulch," I'm pretty patient. I'm okay with kind of working my way up to really having healthy soil. This is a possibility for you. So moving right into planting, which is a wonderful transition that I promise I planned. We'll move right into planting, and we're going to talk about native gardening. So native gardening is just using plants that are native to Washington, or nativars, which are cultivated plants that have been adapted through several rounds of selection and breeding to create sustainable landscapes. And the reason that we call them sustainable is because they require less watering, less maintenance, and they look more like a more wild landscape. They're also more beneficial to wildlife. Wildlife, obviously, in this area evolved to work with these plant communities. So when we plant those plants, wildlife comes in and visits us. A great example of this is there's a particular ground cover that I often recommend to people, and they go, I don't know, it's kind of scraggly looking. It's called beach strawberry. And they go, I don't know, I'm not really certain if I really like this. And I say, hey, plant a little bit, tell me what you think. And I do this knowing very well that they're going to come back to me and almost always say the same thing. And I tell them and they never believe me. But very short period of time, they're like, oh, I still don't know if I like the look of the ground cover, but I love the birds, and the birds come and they eat the strawberries. And I say, yeah, that's kind of the reason that I suggested this, because if you're looking to start inviting birds in, they just cannot help. Those strawberries, once they get ripe, are just their catnip to birds, the bird nip. And it's a great way to kind of introduce some local wildlife into your yard. So the other idea behind them being particularly sustainable is that they're adapted to our drought and flood cycles. So they are used to kind of the watering that happens normally with our wet and dry seasons. So you don't have to water them nearly as much. You don't have to do nearly as much weeding around them. Once they get large, they kind of shade out some of the other weeds. And as a quick definition, plants are, my definition of native plants are if they evolved here. There's some discussion around native versus invasive versus noxious weeds and a lot of that kind of terminology. But as we're describing it here, plants are native if they evolved in this area. They are here natively. I added this because I get this question all the time. Where do I get native plants? Oh, are they more expensive? Oh, can I go dig them up somewhere? So yes, native nurseries can be a little bit more expensive. Usually the reason that they're more expensive is because they do a lot of work on what's called the provenance and determining that the plants are in fact native and that they were developed sustainably. That is a huge thing for prairie plants, which are highly endangered in Washington State. Our Washington State prairies have lost like I think 94% of their total range. And so there's a lot of work that goes into it. So they can be a little bit more expensive, not always. And finding a local place that you feel comfortable getting your plants from and really like getting to know the nursery staff is a great idea. You can, in some cases, go harvest native plants. Now, I want to be fully clear. I am not saying that it is okay to go out to a restoration site or a park and start digging up some plants. Please don't do that. There are things called salvaging events where they're obviously less right now under lockdown, but there are events where an area will be developed, and so a place like a Native Plant Society, like Snohomish Native Plant Society, will say, we're going to go to this area and collect as many of these plants as possible. And we'll send you home with some, and some we're going to hang on to and take back to our own nursery. So you can get salvaging events when they start up again. Unfortunately, I don't have any knowledge as to when they're going to start up again or where the next ones are happening. I can direct you to Native Plant Societies to possibly find that out. Another way to get them is seeds. Now, seeds are even higher under higher scrutiny and higher provenance than actual seedlings from native nurseries. So they can be just as expensive, and they're also a little bit more risky. Because if you plant them, there's no guarantee that they're going to germinate and take hold. And then I couldn't let this go without plugging the Conservation District plant sale. We unfortunately wrapped ours up in February, but it's a really good way to get plants inexpensively. And we are not the only conservation district that has plant sales. So some other resources for determining what kind of native plants you want to use. Websites include the Great Plant Picks and the King County Native Plant Guide. I know we're in Snohomish County, they're King County, but their Native Plant Guide is just phenomenal. It's really good. It has all sorts of great information on it. And what's more, I found this recently. I don't know how long they've had it, but I found it just recently. They actually added a section for example landscaping plans. So you can go through and just start looking at some landscaping plans and say, hey, these are, this is a style that I like. I like kind of how this person has done it. Of course, you don't need to take that verbatim, but they serve as really great launching points, or just to kind of give you some ideas. WSU Master Gardeners are not a bad place to find some native plants. They are definitely more in the ornamental field, so you want to be careful about that. But they have had resources for native plant societies in the past. And can have some connections. Snohomish Conservation District, of course, we have connections to native plants. If you're looking at some of these places and you're just kind of striking out, I need a specific question answered, contact us. We'll be happy to help. Washington Native Plant Society is a statewide plant society that has a lot of information. Their website is fantastic. There are different county native plant societies as well, but the overall state one has a lot of resources. And the University of Washington Herbarium, my alma mater, the Urban Ecology Lab, the Urban Horticulture Lab, the Burke Museum, and the Herbarium are all wonderful, wonderful resources to just kind of stroll through. The Herbarium and the Burke Museum actually have some of the most beautiful plant illustrations that you're ever going to find. And sort of strolling through those and seeing what strikes your fancy is not a bad way to spend an afternoon in terms of trying to figure out what you want to plant. So some things to consider. I've got here a tag, a not uncommon kind of plant tag that you might find with a lot of information that we're going to ask for. So bloom, size, and season. You'll want to know kind of when these things actually bloom out, and you want to know that so that you kind of, if you're thinking about the aesthetics, are all these plants going to bloom at the same time, and do I want to space it out? So like year-round blooms. Some plants are things like, this is, red osier dogwood is sometimes called midwinter fire because it has these bright red stems. And so you think, I really want that because, I don't like just looking at brown, gray, wet, soppy stuff in the middle of winter. So I want some of these plants that in the middle of winter would be bright colors. You want to look at the size, and size is not just an easy thing. On this tag over here, it says 3 to 5 feet height. That doesn't tell you everything that you need to know. You need to know height, you need to know width, and you also need to know root habit. And the root habit is the size and the shape of the roots that are growing. Root habit is sometimes a difficult one to run down, but I strongly recommend putting in the research to find it because it will help you inform spacing. It'll help you determine how far you want it to be from other plants, and how many is too many in an area. Remember that there's plants don't really fight or compete a ton for resources, but they are taking in things passively. So if you plant too many plants in one small area and the roots are kind of overlapping, they can end up, harming each other. You want to look at moisture requirements. That's how much and how often you are watering. This is also usually represented in terms of what kind of soil you need. So on this tag here, we see moist and well-draining soil. That means that this plant is going to want a good amount of moisture, a good amount of water in its soil, but it doesn't want standing water, which means you're going to be watering it often and you're going to be watering it significantly. A different version of this would be moist soil and moist plants. Well, that's great. You need to make sure that it's wet and you can kind of overwater it and that'll be fine. Versus, it wants dry soil and it also wants well-draining soil. Okay, cool. So then don't water it very much at all. And then light requirements. This is usually sun, shade, and partial shade. And that's, pretty easy, except that you want to make sure you want to sort of follow on how, what you don't want to just plan like, all right, I went out to my yard at 9 a.m. and I mapped out where all of the sun and the shade is. Well, that's not going to be accurate because the sun moves across the sky. Or rather, we move around the sun. But from our perspective, the sun moves across the sky. And what areas are partial shade and what areas are full sun or full shade are going to change. That's also going to change throughout the year. So I suggest, I had an old teacher who used to say that you shouldn't do any planting until you live on a place for a year. I think that's probably a little bit of overkill, but I definitely understand what she was getting at. You want to really understand not just what happens throughout the day, but where it goes throughout the season. Now, some of that's going to be easy. You're in a giant, underneath an enormous Doug fir tree is going to be shade pretty much all the time because it's going to blot out, so much of the sun. If it's in the middle, if it's in your front yard, right in the middle of the lawn, that's probably full sun because there's nothing to block it. But other times it can get a little bit fiddly. So you want to really take your time. And then the last thing is just kind of determining site criteria. This is a photo of a backyard that was newly constructed, and I did not do this. Is before I was at the district, but this person asked. I think this is the right one. This person asked kind of what we could do to plant some trees in their yard, and we're looking around going, man, I don't think there's going to be anything. I don't think there's any place for a tree to go. And so you want to consider things like hardscape, where the root's going to go. That's where part of the root thing comes in. But yeah, you want to consider how sunny is it for how long, how fast is the soil going to drain, what other plants are nearby. Is it close to impervious surfaces like this patio? Is it close to the house? Is it close to walkways? And if you are trying to attract wildlife, what kind of wildlife are you trying to attract? Those are just some questions to kind of get you thinking about your site and start kind of narrowing down what you can do and what you want to do. And of course, everything is malleable. If this person really decided, hey, I want to do something totally different, they could completely reorganize this. It might be expensive, but they could completely reorganize this. Before we move on to smart watering, I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions.
There was one answered in the chat, and it was the type of strawberry you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so it's beach strawberry. The botanical name is Fraganensis chloriensis. Fraga. I could spell it, but I can't pronounce it. Fraganensis chloriensis. I think is how you pronounce it. But the common name and a name that you'll find it is either beach strawberry or creeping strawberry. I try not to give out too many common names because everything has a dozen common names, but in this case I can't quite pronounce the botanical name correctly. All right, well, let's continue on with smart watering. So sustainable and efficient watering, there's lots of different types of sustainable and efficient watering. Micro irrigation is of course a good way to do it, deliver just as much water as the plant needs and no more. Water low and in the soil, so the overhead watering is as much as 50% inefficient because as you cast water into the air, it evaporates and it doesn't actually hit the ground or get into the plants, or it lands on leaves where it's not particularly useful. So to use as little water as possible, water low and water as directly in the soil as possible. Remember, what plants are taking up water through their roots. So you want to get water into the soil. Water when it's cold and dry. So that is either first thing in the morning or last thing at night. Try not to water during the day and try not to water when it's particularly hot. Don't water when it's wet. So when it is raining, don't water. You're getting free water from the sky. Don't worry. Don't use the city's water. That's money you don't need to spend, and that's water we don't need to use. Use native and adapted plants. As I said, they're adapted to our rain cycle as best they can be. And so they're thirsty when they're supposed to be thirsty. And you don't need to try to overwater them too much to keep them alive. And then use harvested water. We'll talk about rainwater here in a second, but rainwater is a very good way to cut down on how much municipal water you're actually using. So I get a lot of questions about this image over here on the right. And this image is I think it's just called a watering spike. And it's just a little spike that screws onto the top of a 1 liter bottle that you've emptied out of soda or something. You fill it with water and you shove that spike directly into the ground. Now, the way that this works is that when the soil around the spike becomes saturated, it does not allow any water to pass because there's no air to go into the bottle to replace the water. So it waters very, very minimally because it's keeping the soil around that plant's wet. Now, this is not going to work well for plants that really like well-drained soils because they don't want their roots to be wet. It's not going to be very good for plants that consistently want that they don't want to be watered very often because they don't want their roots wet. But the plant that we looked at a little while ago, when it was said, I really want moist soil, but I want well-draining soil, this would work fairly well. The other thing it works really well is for new plants. Plants, when they get watered in when you first plant them, they're in a little bit of shock. They need as much water as they can get. They're trying to reestablish. They're usually in the process of kind of leafing out and creating new growth. So you want to get them as much water as they can handle. Now, this is kind of an art form, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this because a lot of it is just sort of, hey, it depends. But I wanted to this is a really cheap way to get some of these plants established, and I wanted to use it as an example of just watering the right amount. So as I said earlier, natives require less watering, and you don't have to water nearly as often. They are adapted to having a dry and a wet season. They do this by storing water during the wet season when they're dormant, and then leafing out during the dry season. Losing their leaves after a certain period, and then kind of growing back to themselves and retaining water. Plants structure themselves that way. Plants that come up in different biomes that have like very wet summers, for instance, like they do in different rainforests, have a completely different way of doing things. They do most of their growth in the summer when it's still wet. They compete for photosynthesis, for sunlight. So yeah, it's really just about the plants adapting to different areas, and that's how they get by. I get asked a lot, like, well, why do natives require less water, or how do you know natives require less water? And it's kind of simple. It's that if they weren't adapted to our cycle, they wouldn't have survived here. Washington has dry summers and wet winters, and it's getting consistently drier and wetter through climate change. But these plants have adapted here, and they are better off for this kind of stuff versus bringing ornamental, which might be very shocked by our wets, our very dry summers, and need to be watered throughout the summer. If you are looking to get rid of your lawn, if you're looking to, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but there's some options to reduce your watering. If you're looking to fully get rid of your lawn and replace it with natives, there are a lot of opportunities for that, and we'll get into those a little bit later. So another, as I said earlier about, don't water when it's wet, don't water when it's sunny. These are two great photos of people doing things wrong. This is a very fine mist that is being, on the left here, we have a very fine mist that is being emitted during a very sunny day. And as it's being emitted, probably 50 to 60% of that water that is hitting the that is hitting the air there is just evaporating and not actually making it down to the grass that it's supposed to be watering. And that's extremely inefficient. On the right here, we have, just an absolute downpour, and obviously no rain sensor, and sprinklers are just going off in the middle of a downpour. And, not only is that's probably not only not beneficial, it's probably harmful. You can definitely drown plants. And you're creating these massive mud spots by just doubling up as much water as that's coming down, you're pumping out as well. So yeah, the solution to this is, like I said, don't water when it's raining, don't water in the middle of the day when it's sunny, water in the early morning or the evening, and then know when your plants need the water and how much water they need. Just do a little bit of research, become savvy about that, and deliver them exactly what they need. Now, I want to head off at the pass here a little bit. I've had a lot of people ask about, oh, should we water in the morning or water in the evening? Or I've heard that watering in the morning attracts slugs, or I've heard that watering in the evening causes dewy mildew, all this different kind of stuff. I have definitely heard those. They've always been anecdotal. I've never seen solid evidence that like you should water in the morning versus water in the evening. All I know is that watering during the day is extremely inefficient. Watering during the day is extremely inefficient, and I haven't seen any real cited horticultural evidence, peer-reviewed studies, any good data that shows that it is harmful for plants to water in the morning or the evening. I have definitely seen evidence that it is harmful to overwater, and I think there's a good amount of what is going on there that could be overwatering. But I'm not seeing. I have not seen any evidence that it is specifically tied to watering when it's cold out. So then, as I said earlier, using harvested water is another great way to reduce the amount of water that you're using, the amount of municipal water. So if you do have a rain barrel, this is a very fancy wooden rain barrel. Most of us have the plastic ones instead. But if you have that, and you're trying to figure out, well, I've stored this rainwater, when should I be using it? You want to use it during the summer. That is when your plants probably do need a little bit of watering. Even the natives will need a little bit of watering in the middle of summer. And it's also, again, when it's the driest. So you want to save that rainwater through the wet season. And then when it comes to the dry season, you want to be ready to bust that stuff out. So a lot of people ask about finding rain barrel resources. We, of course, are a fantastic resource. And I strongly recommend coming to us for questions about rain barrels. And if you have any concerns about rain barrels, questions about just kind of how to build one, you can come talk to us. Your cities and municipalities, Mountlake Terrace, for instance, is another good place to get some information. If you're going to build a rain barrel yourself, there are great resources for finding the right materials to actually construct a rain barrel. And there are also good resources on disconnecting your downspout. I'm going to give a quick word to the wise. If you are a renter, or you do not own your spot, or you just don't really feel like you want to go through all the hassle of sawing through your downspout, instead, what you can do is you can go up to the top of your downspout where it connects to your gutters. There's a screw, should only be one screw, that is holding your downspout to your gutters. You can unscrew that, take your entire downspout down without destroying it, tuck it away in your garage or back shed or something somewhere. And you can take a piece of chain, you can attach it to that screw, and you can just put that chain directly into your rain barrel, right onto the top filter. And that is what is colloquially called a rain chain. and it will allow water to find its way down the chin into your barrel. It will be almost just as effective as having a downspout going into it, but you have the option of when it's time to move, you can take the chain down, put the downspout back up, none the wiser. Avoiding mistakes and bad advice. A quick piece of good advice is to keep these as stable as possible. You want them to be on a very stable and level base. When rain barrels are full, they are several hundred pounds. And if they are stable and level, that water will keep the barrels in place. It makes them very safe. If they are not stable and level, it makes them very dangerous. They're prone to falling over. Talking about falling over, a lot of folks have said, oh, you're supposed to attach them to your walls or attach them to your siding so that if there's an earthquake, the barrels won't fall over. No, please don't do that. That much weight, the barrel is going to fall over. If you are in an earthquake that is good enough and you do not have a 100% stable base, your barrel is going to fall over. And all that attaching them to the siding will do is rip your siding out. You can repair your barrel and restock it far easier than you can repair and reapply your siding. Some other folks have said, oh, but I have kids. I don't want the kids crawling on the barrels and the barrels falling over. I fully agree with that. But again, attaching them to the siding is not going to stop that. If that's what you're trying to do, if you're worried about people getting into the barrels and messing with them, build an enclosure. Build something that means that the barrel, there's a lot of different ways to do this, but build something around the barrels. That means that if kids are going to try to climb on them, they won't be able to actually get to the barrel itself. This goes the same for wildlife, and you can reinforce these. So if there is an earthquake and the barrels are sloshing around, the enclosure can be the one that kind of takes the brunt of it. To try to keep them stable rather than doing it to your siding. For anyone who's going to ask, I know SPU was recommending this for several years. I installed several of those barrels, and I'm telling you right now, it's a bad plan. All right, let's move on to pesticides. So a great way to improve stormwater quality is to not have a lot of these inputs that we primarily use, like pesticides, like fertilizers, go into lawns, go into yards. A lot of people come back and say, okay, that's fine, but then what do I do? And unfortunately, my unpopular answer is, well, in that case, you do hard work. So the three biggest, fastest responses to alternatives to pesticides are manual removal, shade, and mulch. Manual removal is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of using Roundup or something on dandelions, if you really don't want dandelions, I am team dandelion, but if you really don't want dandelions, you go out there and you rip them out by hand. You get down so you can get the entire root out, and you do it at a time that those little floating seed bundles aren't going to get out. That's how you do manual removal. At the Conservation District, it's a huge part of what we do. As a restoration ecologist and a contractor, it was a huge part of what I did. It's just kind of part of having a yard or a lawn. You got to do a good amount of removal. Shading out is kind of the opposite. It's not taking plants out, it's putting plants in. If you get native plants in and you are able to kind of build them up and create large shade profiles from those plants, you can do a really great job of shading, of creating areas where weeds don't want to grow because there's not enough sun. Weeds are greedy, and they can come up through everything as long as they have access to sun. They like what's called disturbed areas. They don't like deeply seeded, well-planted areas because they can't get the sunlight that they're looking for. Similarly, mulch is a great way to create kind of a weed barrier. Not a weed barrier in that terrible black plastic or woven plastic, but a surface layer that goes over the top of wherever you don't currently have shade. It makes it difficult for seeds to get from the outside down to the soil, and it makes seeds that are already in the soil, what we call the seed bank, to make their way up through the mulch, again, to get at that to get at the sun of photosynthesize. So a nice thick layer of mulch, 4 inches deep, is another great way to get rid of weeds or prevent weeds without resorting to herbicides or pesticides. So alternative to pesticides, companion planting. Companion planting is the process by which you plant things in a garden next to other plants to ensure that they are to sort of get the co-benefits. So for instance, there are plants that you can plant next to your vegetable garden that will attract pest predators, and then they will, like this armored tank of a ladybug over here, and then they will attack the aphids or there's a specific kind of fly, but I'm blanking on the name, that they will also attack. There's a very famous type of companion planting that I think illustrates this very well. It's called the Three Sisters, and it is corn, beans, and squash. And it's been practiced by a number of indigenous cultures for years and years and years, and it's absolutely a fantastic way to approach this. And I think it's very illustrative of how this works. So the corn is massive and it provides a lot of structure because it's a big stalk. The beans then work upwards around the corn, and the bean flowers are very attractive to pollinators. And when pollinators come for the bean flowers, they also pollinate the rest of the plants. And the beans are also they're leguminous, so they're nitrogen fixers, so they're actually nutrifying the soil. The squash is also a nutrifier, so it's making the soil more rich in nitrogen as well. But it is also it has a natural kind of pesticide on its leaves. It's not really a toxin, but it's a deterrent. And these leaves, which sort of excrete this, are massive, and they cover over a huge part of the lower area. And this natural pesticide washes off in the rain and gets to the soil. So specifically slugs, when they approach and they get that squash pesticide on the soil, they go, okay, well, I guess all of this stuff is off limits, and they go somewhere else. And the system sort of protects and supports each other. It's called Three Sisters. Look it up. It's a really, really cool system. But this is sort of what companion planting can do. There's a lot of books on companion planting and a lot of books on, I want to grow blank, but I'm having this problem. Okay, here are some plant options you can have. Please contact me for more information. I love talking about this stuff. We'd be more than happy to give you some recommendations. And another version is just integrated pest management. I am not a trained integrated pest management trainer, so I'm going to kind of leave it off there because I don't want to give anybody wrong information, and there are much better resources to do this kind of planning than myself. But an integrated pest management is essentially all of the different things that you can do to create a plan to manage pests in your garden without having to resort to pesticides. There are a lot of alternatives. And then reducing other inputs, which means reducing the amount of seeds that you have, in particular grass seeds, or what's called overseeding, which is a really common thing to do, especially in the winter. So reducing the amount of seeds, reducing the amount of water, reducing the amount of fertilizer. There's a lot of different ways you can do fertilizer. Mulch is, of course, a great fertilizer. I promise I don't think mulch solves everything, but it is a really great Swiss Army knife for a lot of things. But also compost. If you're composting on your site, reducing the amount of synthetic fertilizers you're putting in, and instead using compost from your yard. Reducing the amount of fuel, meaning reducing the amount of either gasoline or battery power, or natural gas if you're using weed burning. Reducing anything on that will help. It's less opportunity for pollution to get into the stormwater and runoff, and then reducing effort. If these systems don't work, if you get rid of all of this stuff and then you hate every second, if you get rid of your gas mower and you get yourself a push mower and you're going out there every day push mowing along, blah 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 blah, but you just absolutely hate it, it's not going to be effective because you're not going to do it. So instead, go, all right, well, no, let's get rid of your gas mower, but let's figure out an alternative to having so much lawn so that you aren't using your push mower all that time and you aren't hating the process. So before I go on to our final one on natural lawn care, do we have any other questions? I'm going to take that as a no, or maybe folks are just holding it for the very end. So here is my doom and gloom speech on lawns in the United States. Turf lawns are the single largest irrigated crop in America. They use more water for irrigation than corn, wheat, and fruit orchards combined. They not more than soybeans, though. The U.S. has, and this is a couple years old, so I'm certain that it's changed by now, but it has over 63,000 square miles of lawn, which makes it slightly larger than the state of Georgia if you put all of the lawns together. And this number has also certainly gone up. We use 17 million gallons of gas, $35 million on lawn care every single year. I am not here to just naysay lawns. But if you have any inkling to do something different, if you're not necessarily a fan of your lawn, you want to try something else, now is the time to do it, because there have never been more resources and more impetus to switch your lawn out for something else. So
Dave,
things you can do.
if I can just jump in to go back to a question came in from SQ. How do I get more information on integrated pest management or companion plantings?
You can contact us for more information on companion planting. You can also just Google companion planting Washington State. There's a number of resources about Washington State natives and companion planting. In general, there's a number of, companion planting is very big in permaculture. So there's a lot of permaculture resources and books that deal with companion planting. And it's very easy to find a lot of specifically edible companion planting guides. As far as IPM, Google IPM. Part of the reason I don't want to go too deep into it is because IPM isn't a concept; it's an actual, it's a certification process. And I am not a certified trainer. So there's a lot of information that you can find on the IPM website. And I think if you go IPM Washington, there are specific guidelines for Washington State as well. But if you go through those, you will have a good sense of sort of what it takes and what a plan looks like, and how to put a plan together yourself. But yeah, if you Google IPM Washington, you'll get probably more information than you can handle.
Thank you.
Okay, so alternatives to lawns. So a very common one is backyard habitats, which are exactly what they sound like. They are animal habitats in your backyard that you can use, that you can install instead of lawns, and you get to you get all the benefits of having hummingbirds and squirrels and bees and all sorts of stuff showing up in there in your backyard. They are often very colorful because they're supporting pollinators. You get to the three elements of habitats are food, shelter, and a place to rear young. So it's not, if you're very lucky, you might get some bird nests and you get to watch little birdlets grow up. A lot of folks will ask, well, yeah, but I live in the middle of the city. What kind of habitat am I actually going to be able to provide? You're going to be able to provide very crucial habitat. This is a type of habitat that we refer to as patch, and they provide kind of stopping points for pollinators or migratory birds between between their kind of next their next destination. And they're very, very, very important. So if you think, oh, but it's too small, my mother, for instance, I got her growing milkweed on her tiny back patio, and she absolutely loves that every year the monarchs stop off and visit her backyard, and that's crucial patch habitat. And then, of course, you are helping nearby yards and farms be more productive by providing pollinator support and ecosystem services. So not only is it beautiful for you, but you're helping your neighbors. Backyard prairies are another thing you can do instead of a lawn. These don't use a lot of shrubs or trees, but they do use a lot of flowers and deep rooting grasses. They are probably some of the most colorful and most unique landscapes that you are going to find anywhere in the state. I would be willing to bet that your neighbors do not have one of these unless you live in a really cool neighborhood. They are extremely unique, and they're also extremely necessary. A lot of pollinators and birds here really rely on these prairie ecosystems, and we have destroyed a larger number. We have destroyed an enormous number of them. So there's a wonderful book called The Prairie Owner's Handbook, which I would be happy to pass along to anybody who asks. Phenomenal book, very, very interesting. Strongly recommend looking into it if you're interested.
Hey, David, before you jump to that, there was a question that came in about how do you grow milkweed, and I'm wondering if it's practical for Western Washington or if it's different parts of the country.
It is. Let me get to those questions at the end. We're pretty close to the end now. Let me just get through the rest of these, and then we'll have a larger Q&A in just a couple minutes here. So edible gardens, another great example of something that you can do that are very popular. The farm your yard, or as we refer to it, the lawns to lettuce movement is alive and well. This is a big draw for a lot of people to be able to grow food at home. These gardens do take a lot more inputs and effort, as just because you're not really just kind of letting something go. You're really tending a garden, and if that's the thing that you're into, man, these gardens are great. They really do take a lot of extra effort, but they're very much worth it. And if you do grow more than you need, there's a whole list of food banks that would be more than happy to take your produce. When I was talking about alternatives for actual lawns, clover is a great example. Clover does not get particularly high, not as high as grass. They have really beautiful flowers. They work really well for pets. If you think, I really like kind of having a lawn, but I don't want to do as much with it. You support pollinators, and clover is nitrogen fixing. So it will help nutrify your soil. Nitrogen is one of the #1 nutrients missing in soil. So if you're still if you're thinking, I really want to get rid of my lawn, but I don't know what I want to do yet. I think I want to do native plants, but my soil sucks. Clover is a great place to start. And it will definitely get you on the way to having healthier soil. You can do something more interesting with. So where to get materials? Material yard. That's kind of the quick and easy way to do it. Just go buy whatever you need, put it down yourself. You can do things yourself. You can actually create your own compost bins and your own composting. There are kind of a right and wrong way to do it, especially here in the wet and wild Pacific Northwest. Arborist chips are a wonderful, as I said, I promise I don't think they solve everything, but they're a really great material, these arborist chips. There are, at the end, I will be happy to, for anyone who's interested, talk through chip drop and a very good way to get arborist chips and kind of the necessary steps for people to do that. But they're a really wonderful resource. Here are some more resources, advice. There's a book called Grow Your Own Native Landscape. If you're going to have your own kind of backyard habitat or native landscape, I strongly recommend this book. It's online for free. It is it's so necessary. It's a free PDF and it has so much good information. Western Washington Rain Gardens, or the Rain Garden Handbook, is a good one. We didn't talk a lot about rain gardens, but if you're interested in rain gardens, please look at this handbook. Also contact us. The Prairie Owner Guide, the Prairie Landowner Guide for Western Washington is that book I was talking about for prairie ownership. Wonderful book. I actually read it cover to cover while I was camping out on a prairie, and it was wild. WSU Extension is a good place to look for some of this information. NWF Certified Wildlife Habitat. They are, if you are going to look to actually get your backyard certified as a habitat, you'll want to be familiar with their website. And Xerxes Society has a bunch of great information about pollinators. All right, with all of that aside, I'm more than happy to answer some questions now.
Great. Okay. So then how do you grow milkweed?
Milkweed's fairly easy to grow. In my experience, it's best in a planter box of some kind. And then you can get it from seed. Just know that about 1 in 5 seeds are going to fail. So take 6 or 7 of them and jam them into a little hole. But they grow pretty well from seed. And if you get a decent size, maybe, I think if I'm remembering right, my mother has 8-inch by 8-inch. She probably has 18 inches. About 6 square feet, maybe closer to 8 square feet of planter box, and I think she has upwards of 24 to 30 stalks in that little planter box, and they are prolific. I haven't seen it in a year, so I can't attest to that. But the last time I looked, it was about that, and I have no idea how many butterflies are visiting her each year. But yeah, you can find the seed. You can find the seed from native nurseries. Actually, now that I think about it, I think that I have to look into this, but I think that there was something that was some kind of like monarch society that was sending milkweed seeds out to people who requested them. Don't quote me on that. I'll need to look into it. But if you're interested, I'd be like, you're welcome to look it up yourself or contact me and I'll see if I can find some more information.
Yeah, Xerxes Society is probably a great resource there. So thanks, Bridget, for that question. And then Arian asks, would backyard prairies work well on sloped easements between houses where currently ugly grasses and weeds are growing?
Probably not, because prairies really need a lot of full sun. And if it's between houses, it's going to be in shade for a good chunk of the day. So I would say probably not. There are definitely things that you can plant on there that will actually help retain the slope. Some bushes like red oyster dogwood would be a good one, and those do also have pollinator support, but they're more comfortable in shade, and they're more likely to actually hold the soil.
Another question there. Are there good reference sites to lay out plans for converting something like a flat square lawn into a non-lawn that is attractive looking? She finds she gets stuck not being able to visualize a good looking switch from the current lawn.
Mm-hmm. Start with the King County, I think it was King County Native Plant Society, the King County Native Plant something. I'm sorry. Let me go back and see what I wrote down. I think I'm mixing myself up. King County Native Plant Guide is a good website. They have lots of sample plans that are very useful for kind of, oh, this is, they're all kind of like just, here's a square and we started putting plants in for this sort of look. So you can kind of start from there and be like, oh, I like this photo, I like this photo. Another thing you can do is just go to the Burke Museum and start looking at the different or great plant pics, and just start looking at the pictures of the different plants and go, oh, I like this one. This is a really pretty one. I like this. And then say, all right, well, if I put that here, then what can I like what's left? What can go under it? What can go near it? Oh, well, I could put more of this over here, and that'll just kind of get the juices humming.
Great, thank you. Then some questions about clover lawns. Do they survive year round?
They survive year round. They don't stay as green year round. They will kind of die back and they'll get a little bit yellowy in the winter. But they never fully go away. And they will remain pretty green most of the time. They probably maximum get up to like 6 to 8 inches tall. So you still, if you want to have like a nice close crop clipped looking yard, you can mow them before they start to kind of die back and get yellow, and it will look more trimmed and well manicured. The only thing I would suggest, if you do that though, is either leave the clippings in place. Actually, no, do not leave the clippings in place. But gather the clippings up and be composting those somewhere, because as clover is growing, it's fixing nitrogen, and the clippings are very nitrogen rich. If you leave them on the ground, there is a fairly, especially right before the winter, there is a strong chance that good rains will wash those clippings into a local waterway, which will then nitrogen load the waterway. So get some kind of on-site composting if you can, even just a compost tumbler, and use those clippings to create mulch, to create compost that you can then use as fertilizer for your flower beds.
And then one more question on the clover. How much sun does clover need?
Highly variable, highly variable. It is part shade to full sun, but it can survive most places. It doesn't survive in deep shade for a long time, but if you're going to use it as a replacement for lawn, your lawn probably isn't in deep shade anyway.
And then another one on clover. There are alternatives to clover lawns. How about other steppables?
So the other one that I suggest, is moss. Is very controversial. Some folks are not a fan of moss. I like moss. It is helpful in part because it allows for it's non-vascular, so it never gets particularly tall, and it still has that beautiful emerald green that stretches all the way across if you can get it there. It does prefer a lot of wet, and it does prefer deep shade. So if you have an area that's fairly dry and full sun, it's a little bit harder to get moss to grow in that area. There are a lot of other ground covers that you can use in place of grass, but they won't be as, to use your term, steppable. They're not going to be as nice to kind of trod over. They will definitely take up a large area, and they will definitely be green, but they're not going to have the same look, and they're not going to be as like good for kids and dogs and things like that.
I think I have Corsican mint in my garden. You can walk on that. It spreads, so you have to be very careful with steppables, I would say too.
Yeah, mint in general is a little bit of a gamble, because if you do have it, it will take off. Sorrel is another one. Deepwood sorrel is popular as kind of an alternative, but it will also take off.
So another question on moss. Do you have a favorite moss that does well?
I don't necessarily have a favorite moss. Um, I can, in the spirit of your question, tell you that there is a way to get moss to grow more rapidly. It smells terrible. I'm going to warn everybody up top. It smells absolutely awful, but it works like magic. So you take a blender you don't really care about, and you fill it about halfway up with moss, and then you fill you fill it up as high as you can get in it, with um, buttermilk, and you create this kind of green moss slurry, and then you paint it onto whatever surface you want the moss to grow on. When I was a contractor, I learned this because we had just installed a big area for this woman, and she really, really, really wanted these like beautiful moss covered rocks, and we were like, that's not gonna happen. Like, these rocks are like 4 days old. And my boss said, now we can do it, here's how. And so I went and I made this stuff, and I told her to stay away from it because it was going to get warm and the buttermilk was going to smell like death. But in the course of about a month, she had her beautiful moss covered rocks. So it will help. I'm not going to guarantee anything, but it will help. It will work, but it will also smell like absolute death. So I'm not going to recommend it, but there is a possibility if you really want to get moss to sprout.
Thank you, David. Emma thinks it's horrifying. I love it.
I cannot express how bad this thing smelled. I mean, it's not just like oh yeah, I can imagine what sour buttermilk smells like. Imagine that plus like the deepest dank, like dank earthy smell, on top of this like sour death smell. I like dank earthy smells. I'm an outdoor like deep woods kind of person. This was gnarly.
So we have one more question. It's going back a little bit, with the slope. What type of dogwood did you mention for the slope with shade?
Red osier dogwood, also called red twig dogwood. The botanical name for it is Cornus sericea.
All right, and that's all of the questions there. If you have any more, get them into the Q&A. But thank you so much, David. And then oh wait, there's another one. I want to say thank you to just finish the thought. Thank you to City of Mountlake Terrace for hosting us today too.
Yes,
so, Andy asked, is there a way to get rid of moss and weeds in sidewalks?
The best way to do it is to get yourself a hoary and dig it out. Go like just go in there and actually dig it the rest of the way out, to scrape the stuff away. I will warn people, because this has come up. There is a habit of getting a flamethrower to actually get weeds out of rock areas that they grow through. I strongly discourage that. I strongly discourage that because, one, it's extremely dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. I did it for several years and still managed to burn myself routinely. It is highly pollutant because you're burning natural gas to get rid of stuff. And it doesn't actually solve your problem. It basically, because almost all of these root systems, as long as the roots are intact, they will come back. You're burning everything up to the soil, and then they just come right back afterwards. As a landscaper, it was great because it was an expensive service that we could come out and do over and over again. But as a permanent solution, you are far better just really doing the work, getting down, and actually yanking stuff out.
So another follow-up, and then there's another question from Facebook I'll ask. Is it safe to use vinegar or baking soda?
I see that one and the one from Bridget about vinegar, water, and sugar. I haven't actually tested those myself. I have heard people say that they have worked. I don't know. And what I would also say is in the context specifically of this webinar, we're talking about ways to reduce runoff pollution. Those would be not as bad as pesticide or herbicides, but they still not necessarily things that you want to put in the water. So I will suggest that manual removal is still the best. And that it is still better to dig things out and get them out root and stem, rather than trying any kind of topical application.
And a question from Facebook is, what native plant has the deepest roots?
Oh, I don't know. It would definitely be one of our native prairie plants. It would be a native. Sorry, I'm digging back into my horticultural knowledge. I don't know a plant off the top of my head. It would be a native plant because, or it would be a native prairie plant because of how they develop. And I imagine it would be a perennial native plant because they can sustain root growth through the winter.
Mm-hmm.
But off the top of my head, I really don't know. That book that I recommended, the Native Prairie Landowners Guide, that one, I believe it has root habits for the plants in the back. I believe that's part of the plant entries. That may be a good way to check that. If that one doesn't have it, that's available for free online as a PDF, by the way. If that doesn't have it, grow your own native landscaping, or grow your own native landscape. I know has root habits, and there's a chance that that one will tell you that you'll be able to compare the taproot depth among those plants. So I hope that I don't know off the top of my head, but I hope that points you in the right direction.
Yeah, thanks, Christy, for that question. I think mainly that slide that you show is so great because it shows the depth of all the different plants. And
Yeah, I wish that I had an image like that for specifically native Washington prairie, like Washington prairie plants. Almost all of that one is actually from Iowa, which is a bummer because it really is beautiful. And we do have some of those plants here in Washington State natively. But we don't. I don't have one that is just that, but only for Washington natives, which is a bummer. I wish that I had one for that.
all right, last call for questions, and thank you so much for asking them. All right. Well, this is great, David. Thank you so very much for going through natural yard care. Just for everybody on the call, I will be sending out this recording as well as some of the other resources. There's a great guide that was produced by the county and the district and a bunch of other folks about natural yard care. And so a lot of the things that David talked about today, we will, you can just read through that guide and also just follow up. So again, thank you so much to the City of Mountlake Terrace for joining us and supporting this work. We will get this off to everybody. And David, thanks so much. Enjoy the sun this week. Water early or late. Don't water midday because you'll just be wasting water. We learned that today. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.